I don't want to speak here.
I know that. Okay. I think you're good.
Okay.
You're on though. Do you want to?
Good afternoon, committee. Thanks to all who are able to join us here or online. Is the mic working yet? Oh, there it is. So good afternoon again. Welcome. We will call to order. I appreciate everyone here and online, and Hope that you're able to get the information easily online. I'm glad that everyone was able to be safe, which supersedes anything that we have of importance on the agenda. We do have a number of items to cover. We will do our best to move through that efficiently. And Director Conroy, as always, gracious, has agreed to fill in as much or little as we have from our capers overview, and the remainder will carry over to Wednesday. I would start the meeting with any request for bill introductions. I would recognize Mr. Hine if he is on the WebEx.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me? Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Derek Hine. I'm here today on behalf of my client Turo to request the introduction of a bill dealing with peer-to-peer car sharing, and that is 21 RS 0667.
Thank you, Mr. Hine. Are there any questions on the bill? Is there any objection to the introduction? Without objection, the bill will be introduced. Thank you, Mr. Hine.
Thank you.
Are there any further bill introductions? Seeing none, and are there any hands coming up on the WebEx? All right. Seeing none, we would move to one of the things we had talked about last week was the possibility of working, was it 2072, Representative Riley? That is the RBC date change. I did not have that spelled out on the agenda that you have on your page in front of you. I would ask the committee if there's any concern with that based on who is here. With those who are not in the building, also, if you have a concern and would like to be here to vote on it, more than happy to wait till Wednesday if you think it's appropriate for us to proceed with that bill. I think that one is more cut and dried, and I would be comfortable voting on it, but I would like to check with the body. In particular, I would ask if anyone would like us to handle it differently on the WebEx. Be thinking about that and raise your hand, and I would recognize Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I would second what the chairman said. This bill comes before the Insurance Committee every year. It's a simple date change. It's only technical in nature, and it's not going to have any effect on anything else but that particular area. So without question, I would ask if we could pass this out, House Bill 2072 favorably, and put it on the consent calendar.
Thank you, Representative. Is that a motion?
Yes, sir. So
I have a motion from Representative Neighbor to pass favorably and put on the consent calendar, seconded by Representative Riley. Anyone who is on the WebEx, if you have an objection, we could hold up. But short of that, I think we will move forward. So please raise your hand if you do. Is there any discussion? If there is no discussion or objection, Representative Neighbor, you may close on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I'm not one to put a lot of things on the consent calendar. There's always a question, but this is a simple date change that occurs every year. It doesn't require any new language. It just requires that one change. And this is though the insurance department can be in compliance. Therefore, I move my motion.
Thank you. You have heard the motion by Representative Neighbor to pass House Bill 2072 favorable and be placed on the consent calendar. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. Ayes do have it, and 2072 is passed. So thank you, committee. That just lets a piece of the process start moving forward and get a few things out of the revisor's office. I thought that one was simple enough to be dispensed with today, so appreciate the committee's agreement on that. With that, we'll move into some of the information that we have. We'll start with an overview from the Joint Committee. We'll go into a little more detail on the drop plan, and then we have a couple of hearings that we will want to move into directly. So to start with the report of the Joint Committee, I would ask if Melissa is online to help us.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Johnson and committee members, for the opportunity to review the report of the Joint Committee on Pensions, Investments, and Benefits this afternoon. And committee members, KLRD drafts and publishes the reports of the committee, interim committee meetings of statutory joint committees and certain commissions, oversight committees, and task forces. My comments will focus primarily on the committee's recommendations and conclusions that are found in the gray box on the first 2 pages of the report. And a little background committee on this joint committee, KSA 46-2201 contains provisions establishing the joint committee, whose composition is 5 senators and 8 representatives. The law requires that both the chairpersons of the Senate Ways and Means and House Appropriations Committees or their designees serve among the membership of this joint committee. The Joint Committee on Pensions, Investments, and Benefits was created under 1992 law and is required by statute to monitor, review, and make recommendations regarding investment policies and objectives formulated by the Board of Trustees of KPERS, review and make recommendations relating to benefits for members under KPERS, consider and make recommendations to the standing committees of the Senate specified by the President of the Senate relating to the confirmation of members to the KPERS Board of Trustees, review and make recommendations relating to the inclusion of city and county correctional officers as eligible members of the Kansas Police and Firemen's or KP&F retirement system, and review reports regarding working after retirement exceptions. This joint committee is permitted to introduce legislation as it deems necessary, and 2 of its 3 recommended bills have been introduced and placed in this committee. The committee was given 1 meeting day by the Legislative Coordinating Council to conduct its business this interim and met on December 2nd, 2020, and received updates on and from the Deferred Retirement Option Program, or DROP, and the Legislative Division of Post-Audit Findings, the KPERS administration and the KPERS Board of Trustees on the December 31st, 2019 annual valuation, and the pension bond performance, investment performance, and the KPERS Tier 3 dividend formula. The committee also heard from its staff regarding recent retirement benefits legislation. In addition, its chairperson requested and the committee received comment on the potential impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on the retirement system. And that's not only on investments, but also the economy and the administration of benefits, as KPERS is an administrative agency as well, and its operations. Following the presentation and discussion, the committee made a series of conclusions and recommendations, and again, those appear in the gray box. The first on the annual valuation and total fund performance. The Joint Committee commends the outstanding work of the KPERS Board of Trustees and the KPERS staff in its continued improvement of the unfunded actuarial liability, also referred to as the UAL. The Joint Committee recommends meeting funding requirements and working with KPERS on its cash position needs to make certain there are certainty and funding available. The Joint Committee made a further recommendation. In this instance, it recommended to not re-amortize prior to the 10-year mark, and presently the legacy UAL it will extinguish in 2033 unless such recommendation comes from the KPERS Board of Trustees. It's important to note that this annual actuarial valuation, which measures assets and liabilities, provides the basis for calculating future employer contribution rates. The 2019 valuation is used to set the fiscal year 2023 contribution rates for state and school employers and the calendar year 2022 contribution rates for local employers. And it also serves as the baseline for any cost studies that are conducted during the 2021 session. I will let Alan Conroy is going to address some information he's also provided to you in his overview. So I will just simply say the annual valuation was characterized as good news. And there were overall improvements, particularly to the funded ratio and contribution rates that Director Conroy will address in his report. Page 3 of the Joint Committee's report also includes a summary of the information that was presented regarding the actuarial valuation, the overall funded ratio, the unfunded actuarial liability, and then those actuarially required contribution rates for state school employers. The next recommendation relates to the Board of Trustees and KPERS administration, and the committee supports the modernization of the KPERS pension administration system. The Joint Committee received an update on the Board of Trustees activities from the KPERS Executive Director, who indicated that the board had approved this project and it serves as the highest priority for the 2021 session, and it's the modernization of the pension administrative system. This system is maintained by KPERS and it provides the functionality needed to collect data and contributions from employers and to process and pay benefits. KPERS started using this system in 2005 and reports that the existing system remains capable of providing processes such as collecting contributions and paying benefits. But due to the required customizations over the years, it has become less efficient and more unstable over time. The KPERS administration and the board made the decision to begin a multi-year modernization effort with the fiscal year 2021 budget. And more information on that project is found on page 7 of the report. In terms of the DROP, or Deferred Retirement Option Program, the committee recommended retaining only those eligible employees of the Kansas Highway Patrol and Kansas Bureau of Investigation in the DROP until the current statutory sunset date of January 1st, 2025. And that was in order to gain additional information about these participants and allow the legislature to evaluate the cost and success of the program before considering expansion to other KP&F agencies. The Joint Committee recommended the introduction of legislation that this committee is considering today that would allow participants to extend their currently locked-in periods of participation. That is, that 3-year, 4-year, or 5 years are chosen at the time of sign-up for this program. And the committee further requested a fiscal estimate be provided for the costs associated with this proposal, and Director Conroy will address that issue today. Information on the DROP plan and its participants appears in the post-audit report that this committee also will be receiving shortly after my presentation. So I will just note that they will also, their representative will address the audit itself and provide some information about those participants who currently are eligible or choose to participate in the DROP plan. The committee report also addresses other legislation. And in terms of legislation, the committee also recommended the introduction of language to bring the KPERS Internal Revenue Code guidepost section into compliance with the relevant federal CARES Act provisions relating to retirement plan distributions and loans, and further recommended legislation to update the 457 plans companion 401A plan language in the KPERS statutes. And Director Conroy mentioned those at our last meeting. And that is in the form of a Senate bill. And then the committee also recommended reintroducing provisions of 2020 House Bill 2452 relating to death and disability benefits and service-connected deaths. The committee is also going to hear this bill today, and that is in the form of House Bill 2063. The next recommendation relates to working after retirement statutes and emergency management. And the Joint Committee noted its discussion regarding the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on KPERS staff and the administration of retirement benefits. The committee discussed working after retirement provisions and the temporary waiver of the required waiting period. And I would note here that Kansas law requires a 60-day waiting period, 180 days if the person retires prior to the age of 62, for KPERS retirees who return to work for retirement system employers. This law also governs those returning to a position covered by the Board of Regents mandatory retirement plan, and KP&F retirees have a required 30-day waiting period. The committee also made a more general comment relating to emergency management and disaster legislation and law, and that's included in the report as the legislature continues to look at emergency management beyond the most recent bill, Senate Bill 14, that required the date change and a more immediate action. The committee notes that there's a broader discussion that could be had regarding whether there might be potential legislation that would involve only KPERS, or a more broader issue related to the Emergency Management Act or executive orders of the governor as it pertains to working after retirement, and how to address this waiting period change. So the committee encouraged some consistency in the need for guidance in a future pandemic regarding working after retirement benefits. In terms of KP and F, there was also a recommendation regarding the Kansas Police and Firemen's retirement system, and the Joint Committee encouraged individual standing committees of the legislature to continue discussion on possible additions to KP and F. The committee acknowledged its prior study and recommendation in 2019 relating to the transfer of employer groups into different KPERS plans and future study topics. And so that, for example, would be the state and local correctional groups. The committee also recognized the ongoing work for a legislative solution for certain employees of the Kansas Department of Wildlife, Parks, and Tourism, and encouraged that this option be examined by the legislative committee before consideration of movement to KP and F. And I would note in 2019, when the Joint Committee considered this issue, it received a review of 9 past interim reports over time that discussed the transfer of employees into different retirement plans. The committee also had one final recommendation regarding the Tier 3 formula, and it recommended that the ongoing review of the Tier 3 dividend formula to provide equity as intended. And just a reminder from Director Conroy's prior presentation, Tier 3 differs from plans 1 and 2 design, as it is a cash balance retirement plan, and it's based on members' contributions and earning retirement credits from the employer, which are then tracked through the member's career. And if you would like to know more about the dividend formula, there is information on page 6 of this Joint Committee's report. Chairman Johnson, that is a review of the conclusions and recommendations from the 2020 Joint Committee report, and I would be happy to answer questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Ms. Rennick. Committee, are there questions? Representative Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Melissa, a lot of ground to cover. Thank you for doing that. So on that last section, second to last section on the KPNF participation, it was on page 2. There'd been some talk, and I don't know whether it had gone through, about moving tourism over to commerce. Do you know anything about that?
This would not be related to that proposal. I do not know whether that would come forward in the form of an executive reorganization order or at the agency level. This recommendation was in response to legislation offered in the 2019-2020 sessions regarding certain employees of KP Wildlife, Parks, and Tourism. And so that was simply a discussion about whether those officers should be treated differently. And trying to find a legislative solution to best meet the needs of those employees. These would be your game wardens, some of your officers that would be providing assistance in public land operations.
Representative Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up on that, though, I remember that discussion from last year, and I remember particularly Representative Bleck, who has that background, was very much in favor of this, but the Office of Tourism was put underneath that department, and those folks are a completely different mindset than the folks that are over in wildlife and parks as far as game wardens, et cetera. And so that's why I was wondering whether there had been anything happened to that, because that might make a factor in our discussion of the people that are considered under police and firefighting retirement that are tourist folks. Right, thank you.
Certainly, I understand the question now. Representative Riley, yes, this was in response to the bill that was advanced twice, once each session by the Financial Institutions and Pensions Committee at the time. And that was really limited to those employees that were game wardens or public land officers. That would not have included a much broader employee group. That was a very intentional group of individuals who are being identified, much as it might be for security officers or correctional employees. It was a much smaller subset of the department itself.
Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Melissa, how many years has there been an attempt to do this KP and F Tier 2 added on? I know it's been offered before.
Yes, I don't think I can count each year that it's been offered. Since I've been working with financial institutions and pensions, it's been across multiple biennium. And I can certainly provide that to the committee. There was a discussion even prior to a joint committee in 1992. There were discussions, including a special committee on pensions. This has been a long issue longer-term issue that's been studied by the legislature over time, but I'd be happy to provide that to the committee.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Other questions, committee? I might add a couple of thoughts, and Ms. Rennick, if you'd correct me if I speak incorrectly. On the first point, we had mentioned, in addition to the good news in terms of the work and management that Khpers had done, the management of expenses and the total return, that we noted the cash target and had wondered if some part of the cash target was related to the uncertainty of payments from the legislature increasing that cash target. And that was something that we did want to follow up on just a little bit, in that a 5% cash target on a 20 billion fund is $1 billion. And some of us get nervous with that number. Anyway, that was one piece that had come up on that. In the working after retirement statutes, again, more towards the Khpers end, we had wanted to make sure that the decisions and the actions that had been taken to make sure that the working after retirement rules worked in the situation that we were in, that we were clear on how that window opened and also perhaps how it closed as we moved into and through situations like the pandemic. We think that might be being dealt with in the Judiciary Committee with the overall issues, but just wanted to follow up that that is addressed in some place. And then on the Tier 3 formula, we might, if we have time to dive into it a little more deeply, look at what was our target return that we had hoped to achieve for Tier 3 employees as participants, and is our formula getting us in that range as we look at that going forward, now that we're fortunate to be moving down on the liability rather than up. We might have a chance to take a breath and make sure that it's working as it was designed. With the design, we had models, but having real experience we thought might be useful now that we're 5 years in. So just some other points that I remember more from the discussion, and certainly not trying to go any deeper in the report. But if I had that accurately, I'll look if there are other questions or comments to correct that.
Mr. Chairman, I would agree to those comments that you've provided and just say that this committee met December 2nd and was trying to also anticipate what calendar year 2020's results would be, laying over at the pandemic itself and some of the volatility in the markets. And so I think some of those recommendations were certainly meant to speak to those and the uncertainty you've addressed.
Thank you. There are no further questions on this topic. Thank you for the overview and reminding us the jumping off point that we have from the interim committee. And those are the two bills that we will be hearing today that Melissa just mentioned to us in the interim report. So from that, we would move to an overview of the post-audit related to the drop. And if, Andy, if you'll help me pronounce your last name correctly, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Hi, my name is Andy Brienzo from Legislative Post Audit. Can you hear me okay?
You can.
Excellent. So this audit we completed in September of 2020, and it answers two questions about drop. So the first one is how drop affects state agencies, and for that we tried to look at it in kind of a holistic way, looking at the cost to KHP, KBI, and Khpers, looking at retirement decision-making, looking at staffing. I'll get to all those details in a minute. And then the second question was how Kansas drop compares to similar programs in other public pension plans. And for that, we looked at some neighboring states. I found actually that Kansas drop compares pretty well with other similar plans. But before I get into that, let's go, for anyone who's following along in the audit report, to page 2, where you can see the sort of bottom line answer to question 1, which is that we thought drop appears to help agencies keep experienced staff without significantly increasing costs. So as Melissa mentioned just a moment ago, and as you can see towards the middle of page 2 there, the legislature created drop within KP&F specifically for KHP originally in 2015, and then KBI in 2019. And those members from those two agencies are the only ones who are eligible. There was some talk during the 2020 session about potentially expanding it to other KP&F employers, of which there are currently 112. That legislation didn't pass, but we looked at some topics related to what that may have done, and that's a little bit later in the report, and I'll go over that at a pretty high level since that's not currently being actively considered. So if you go to the bottom of page 2 and then into page 3, we get into a little bit of the mechanics of how this program works. So basically, once a KHP or KBI staff member is eligible for retirement, they have 3 options. So they can either retire and stop working. So of course, they stop earning their salary and they begin receiving their monthly retirement benefits. It's a typical retirement. They can keep working outside of drop. So this is just continuing to work as they've done throughout. They will keep earning their salary. And critically, they will keep accruing service credits. And the third option is, of course, to keep working and join drop. And if they do that, they keep earning their salaries, but they stop accruing their service credits. So KPERS calculates what their monthly retirement benefit would have been if they'd chosen retirement instead, and then starts crediting that amount to their drop account. And depending on how well the KPERS trust does, they can also earn up to 3% annually in interest. Now, when they decide to join the drop, they have to choose how many years they will participate in the program. They can do 3, 4, or 5 years. Of course, right now, that is an irrevocable decision. If they stay for at least 3 years, they get to keep that interest that I just mentioned. And if they don't, then they forfeit that, but they still get the retirement benefit amounts that were credited to their account. And for those following along in the report, the top of page 4, figure 1, has a pretty good graphic representation of what this looks like. There we compare a typical retiree who works for 25 years and then retires with the drop participant who works for 25 years, joins drop and works for another 5 years and then retires. So that situation is illustrating drop working as intended, which is of course to incent retirement that is deferred from when the member originally intended to retire. Now that doesn't always happen. Sometimes people may join drop in anticipation of a pre-planned retirement date, but this is how the program is intended to work. So moving down on page 4, you'll see that in order to understand better how drop impacts retirement decision-making among KHP and KBI staff, we sent out an electronic survey to 111 drop-eligible current and former employees. We received 60 responses, and 28 of those were actually drop participants out of the 39 staff who had joined drop by April of 2020. That's 72%, which gives us a pretty good window into how drop may have affected their retirement decision-making. And in figure 2 at the top of page 5, you can see that most drop participants who responded said that the program has been very or extremely important in some of their retirement decision-making. So this is things like retirement planning, determining when to retire, and then of course financial security in retirement. And figure 3, you can see that 18 participants said that the primary reason why they joined drop was because it was financially more advantageous to them than other options. So moving on to page 6, you'll see that we dug a little bit more into KHP. Drop participants. So as I mentioned before, KHP got access to the program in 2015. KBI only got access in 2019. So we had more data on KHP participation and their employees' drop and retirement decision-making. If you go to the top of page 7, you'll see figure 4 shows that KHP drop participants will likely work more years on average than non-participating retirees. So this assumes that everyone from KHP who elects drop for 3, 4, or 5 years works through the end of their drop period and completes the drop period that they've selected. But you can see that assuming that happens, drop participants at KHP will likely work more years on average, and they'll work to more advanced ages on average. But as you can also see in figure 4, the years that KHP drop participants and non-participants are working are starting to converge to the point where in 2019, drop participants, assuming they finish their drop periods, will only work for 2 years longer on average than non-participants. At the bottom of page 7, you'll see that there were a couple of additional, maybe more granular staffing issues that KHP was hoping DROP would address. So the overarching goal, of course, is to get experienced staff to work longer than they may have otherwise, 3, 4, 5 years longer. But KHP in 2015 also was hoping that DROP would help them with a couple of additional things. So one was that they didn't feel they had enough road troopers. These are the frontline law enforcement staff who are actually patrolling the highways in Kansas. They also identified 65 understaffed counties that they were hoping DROP would help them address. Now, we found in our analysis, you can see this at the bottom of page 7 and onto the top of page 8, that DROP may actually be more effective for retaining higher ranking administrative staff who are not actually those frontline law enforcement staff that they were targeting with this program. So administrators during 2016 to 2019 made up about 14% of KHP retirees, but 36% of DROP participants. And then by contrast, the frontline staff made up about 83% of KHP retirees, but only about 64% of DROP participants. So frontline staff are actually proportionally underrepresented among DROP participants. We also found that only 8 participants had come from those 65 counties that KHP had identified as understaffed in 2015. They came from 6 of those 65 counties. So it also may be less effective for retaining staff in those types of counties. Now moving down on page 8, you'll see that only about 32% of eligible KHP and KBI staff had joined DROP by the time we did this audit. So this was April 2020 data. 39 of 121 staff had elected to join DROP. Now, on average, those staff had 28 years of service. And remember, participant service credits are frozen as soon as they enter the program. So current employees who were eligible but hadn't joined yet only had 22 years of service on average. So we think that probably some of those staff will join DROP once they accrue more service credits before they're willing to freeze that number. And then in figure 5 at the bottom of page 8, you'll see that we had 10 non-participating employees tell us they do plan to join DROP. This is referring back to our survey that we conducted. We had 5 who were unsure, so of course they could join or not. Now on page 9, we get into some of the costs associated with this program. So we looked at administrative expenses of the 3 agencies that are primarily involved. So it's KHP, KBI, and KPERS. We looked at staffing expenses at KHP and KBI. And then we looked at the KP&F pension plan. And in all, what we are hearing from agency staff is that DROP has not significantly increased administrative expenses. So none of those 3 agencies have had to hire extra staff. And KHB officials told us they've only had to do about $145,000 in IT upgrades to handle this program. DROP also isn't creating any new staff expenses for KHB and KBI. So these are participants in this program are actually staff who were already there. They were already being paid. And when this program works as intended, they simply are sticking around longer than they might have otherwise. So it doesn't create a new staff expense. Because if these participants had decided to retire instead, of course, they would have to be replaced with a different staff person who would make roughly the same amount of money. And there's some training and other expenses that would help offset any difference in those salary levels. And then finally, at the bottom of page 9 and onto page 10, you'll see that DROP is designed to be cost neutral to the pension plan. So the biggest way that this occurs is contributions are made by both employees and their employers. So that doesn't stop when someone joins DROP. They start getting the equivalent of their retirement benefit credited to their DROP account, but they're also, at the same time, continuing to pay into KP&F, and that helps offset the cost of DROP. Now, it's possible, especially if DROP doesn't work as intended, that KPERS actuarial liability may go up. So participants who join DROP and then retire when they were going to anyway don't spend an extra 3 to 5 years contributing to KP&F, and neither do their employers. Instead, they are drawing benefits for an extra 3 to 5 years. KPERS officials told us they don't have enough data yet to say whether DROP is cost neutral overall. But regardless, DROP does not affect KPERS' unfunded actuarial liability. So KP&F employers as a group have to contribute enough to fund the system's liability. And Khp's actuaries reassess this every year. That includes drop. So if drop does one day increase the unfunded actuarial liability of KPN, then the employers will have to pay an increased rate to cover that. But Khp's actuaries told us that drop itself has likely not affected that rate yet. So moving on to page 10, this is where we get into the potential effects of expansion to all 112 KP&F employers. So we did this work, as I mentioned, based on 2020 Senate Bill 343, which envisioned expanding it from just KHP and KBI to all KP&F employers. And of course, that didn't pass. But in order to understand sort of what might happen if that were to pass, we talked to several KP&F employers across the state who don't have access to the program yet, and they were all pretty positive about it. They thought it was a useful recruiting and retention tool. They thought it might help retirees pay for health insurance, and they thought it might help with succession planning. And they told us they would consider allowing their employees to participate, and that all of their employees would have an interest in expanded drop. Now, the thing that they were most concerned about, of course, was the cost, the potential for an increased employer contribution. If you look at the bottom of page 11, Khp's actuaries looked into this in 2020 based on potential for expansion. And they came up with 3 scenarios, each of which would increase the employer contribution rate slightly. And it's really depending on how people use the program. In other words, whether they actually defer their retirement, work later, contribute longer, and then retire, or if they join early in anticipation of a pre-planned retirement date, or theoretically, if drop would actually induce them to retire earlier than they had originally anticipated. That's the most expensive scenario that the actuaries came up with. But these 3 scenarios ranged from 0.17% to 1.16% increases. So these are minimal increases. And regardless of what happens, the scenarios created by the actuaries do not envision an increase in the unfunded actuarial liability because, of course, the employer contributions are going up to prevent that. Now, part of where this is coming from, part of why these increases are relatively small, you can see on page 12 is answered by our question 2. So we looked at Kansas drop and several other drops in Colorado, Iowa, and a couple in Nebraska, including the city of Omaha's program, which Khp's officials told us is the model for Kansas program. And Kansas drop already includes most of the elements that these other programs use to achieve cost neutrality. Page 13, figure 6 there provides a pretty good overview of how Kansas compares to the other programs that we looked at, and it compares very favorably. So nearly all of the elements that these other programs use to achieve cost neutrality is in place already in Kansas. The one that has the fewest elements of cost neutrality is Nebraska's program, which partially because of costs has actually been closed to new participants. And that is the one that is the least like the one here in Kansas. So we looked at a couple of different elements that weren't in place, talked to Khp's officials about it, but they really cautioned against changing Kansas drop based on other programs at this point. They said it's important to continue collecting data on KHP and KBI's experiences with drop so that any future changes like expansion to the rest of the KP&F employer group could more accurately predict what the cost might be. So we didn't have any recommendations for this audit, either for Khpers or for the agencies involved or for the legislature. And so that's the end of my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Committee questions? Representative Proctor.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for that presentation. I want to make sure I understood what you just said. A member who enrolls in the DROP program ceases to accrue more years for the multiplier for their final benefits, but I don't know that you said this, but I inferred from what you were saying that the additional liability comes from the fact that their salary will continue to increase for that final calculation of those high 3 salaries. Is that correct?
So you're right to say that their service credits are frozen when they join drop, because it's as if in that respect they have retired. They could receive some salary increases between when they join drop and when they retire. The biggest, according to our understanding, according to our conversations with the actuaries and with CAPERS, the biggest factor that could increase the actuarial liability to KP&F based on this program is actually member behavior. So to the extent that it's possible for members to be induced actually to retire earlier because of the drop for whatever reason, that would be the biggest factor that would increase the actuarial liability. If the program functions as intended and people actually defer retirement beyond when they had originally intended to retire, then it is designed to be cost neutral in that specific scenario, when to the extent that that is occurring. But if people are retiring earlier because of the drop, that could increase the liability.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Other questions, committee? So I appreciate the overview, and it is that behavior piece that is key to the cost. And as we look at that, I think page 7 started to get to that in the chart that was there. Do we have any data yet on whether that retirement age appeared to be moving a year or two earlier, which would be the liability potential increase, certainly if everyone just follows? And I planned on working 34 years. I worked 34 years, and this induced me to work 2 more. We are in agreement that that would be cost neutral. But if I planned to work 34 years and I worked 32, and then I extended for 3, perhaps that would have changed the overall liability to the plan. Does the data on page 7 give us any indication that that might be happening, or other data that we collected?
So let me make sure I understand your question. It sounds like you're asking whether we have data to say whether people are joining drop in anticipation of a pre-planned retirement date rather than actually deferring.
And
is that right?
Just to add some specificity to that, since it's hard to know what intent is, I wondered if we had any apparent change in the number of years that someone worked or the age at which they retired from prior to 2016 to present. It looked like in that chart, I'll scroll back up, that the difference in years might have been collapsing, but I don't know if I'm reading that into it or if it has any relation to that.
So we don't know exactly why the participant average years worked and the non-participant average years worked appear to be converging between 2016 and 2019. In 2016, it's clear that participants were working longer careers on average, significantly longer careers on average. As you point out, they are converging, but we don't know exactly why that might be happening, because as you say, we can't know what people's behavior would have been in the absence of the program and what exactly drop is doing to change what their retirement decision making. Now, we try to get at that to some degree with the survey. This is in figure 3 at the bottom of page 5. One of the options that we gave people when asked primarily why they joined drop was that they were going to delay retirement anyway. So this is the concept of them joining drop because they were going to work anyway, and it didn't make any difference to what their choice was as far as how long they were going to work. Very few people indicated that, but of course, we don't know with certainty why the numbers are converging or what the counterfactual would be. In other words, what they would have done if drop didn't exist.
Thank you. For you and CAPERS, if there's any idea of what the average age was or the average years worked were that we can measure from prior to 2016 and through the program, we might try to monitor that to see if there's any indication. although that wouldn't be definitive either. A couple of questions as we looked to who participated, et cetera, that we had wanted to keep frontline workers, and we had wanted folks in the 65 counties. Helpful to get that sense. I would wonder if I try and look at both sides of the coin, if I did have 64% who are frontline workers, is that still a meaningful number that I may have changed behavior on? While I did get a lot of administrative folks and disproportionately administrative folks, let's see, if I put that 64%, how many would that be that I might have kept on the front line?
I'm not sure exactly what that would be.
So no worry. Thanks for the information. The other thing, just again, to try and get a sense, while only 8 of the 27 were from the 65 counties that I wanted, what is the distribution of folks between those counties if there's a preponderance in the other counties already, and 8 was a relatively high percentage of those in those counties? Am I still thrilled that I got 8? So just trying to get a good handle on the achieving of those objectives, although very helpful to get that information, and I was just wanting to go a little deeper in it.
Sure.
So thanks for listening to those thoughts, and if we come up with any information that's useful. Are there any other questions that folks have on that post-audit? The other one, I'm going to get even further out of your wheelhouse on it. As you know, we're going to have a bill that talks about extending from 3 to 5 years. Did we have any data that would give us an indication of what that might do on either behavior or cost in the post-audit? Not that we should have.
No, we don't know exactly what that would do. The only thing that I could speculate is, so Khpr's actuarial consulting firm told us that later retirements are beneficial financially to the system. So to the extent to which allowing members to initially select 3 years and then change their mind and work for 5 years, to the extent to which that pushes people to retire 2 years later than they would have otherwise, that could have a benefit to the system. But again, because we can't know what they would have done without the program, we cannot speak to exactly what would have happened. That would be a question for the actuaries, and probably based on gaining a little bit more data on the KHP and KBI experiences.
Thank you. Other questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you, and thank you for the perspective on that last question, Mr. Brienzo. Appreciate your work.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh. Who do we have?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is Mike Dodson. I have a quick question if I can.
Yes, Representative Dodson.
When you look at the trying to analyze the change that might come about with this, what is the total number of participants in the state of Kansas right now? And what does this represent as a percentage of that number?
So at the time that we did the audit, let's see, this is on page 8. We have some statistics on this. So at the time that we did the audit, which is April of 2020, is when we gathered the data that we used for this audit. So it's a little bit dated now. But 121 employees from KBI and KHP could have participated, and of those, 39, or about 32%, had actually done so.
Well, I meant what's the total number in the state of Kansas now?
Who are currently participating?
Isn't this an addition? I may have misunderstood this, but since I'm new, please forgive me. Isn't this suggesting that this is an addition, and this analysis is meant to analyze that addition to existing plans?
So this program allows certain KHP and KBI staff who are KP&F members to, when they reach retirement eligibility, join this program and receive both the equivalent of their retirement benefit and their salary at once for the last 3 to 5 years of their career. So it's an additional program that is sort of on top of the KP&F program. that only a small number of KP&F employees are eligible to participate in.
Is this program not current under CAPERS? That is, if you're an employee in the city of Manhattan, this is not one of the things you're eligible for?
That's right. So of the 112 KP&F employers, state and local employers, only KHP and KBI staff are eligible to participate. So there's about 565 KHP troopers and KBI agents. There's about 7,500 total KP&F members. So the majority of KP&F members are not eligible to participate.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. And again, thanks for the answer. Are there other questions? You can raise your hand, or I'll give you a moment to cut in on the WebEx. Hearing nothing further, again, thank you, Mr. Brienzo, for the overview of the post-audit.
Thank you.
Yes, we'll move directly into our first hearing, which will be on House Bill 2063. Thanks to our conferees for waiting patiently as we get to our hearing item. And we will begin with an overview from the reviser.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. This is David Weiss with the Office of Reviser Statutes. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes,
great. Yes, House Bill 2063, as Melissa indicated in her presentation, this was a bill recommended by the Joint Committee on Pensions, Investments, and Benefits. This is a reintroduction of bill from the 2020 session, House Bill 2452. And that bill actually passed the House last February, 125-0. Made it to the Senate. The Senate Committee on Financial Institutions and Insurance recommended the bill favorably, but just due kind of to the the abrupt nature of the session last year, the bill did not come above the line on the Senate side. So it just kind of was a victim of the early dismissal of the session. What this bill does is provides additional benefits for Kansas police and firemen or KP&F Tier 2 member, spouse, and children if the member dies from a service-connected disability. Currently, the KP&F Tier 2 members, and at this point, that's probably the vast majority, is that those are members of KP&F that joined after July 1 of 1989. So that's the vast majority at this point, I suppose. There is no distinction between a service-connected and non-service-connected disability. Currently, if a disabled member dies before becoming eligible for a KP&F retirement benefits from a service-connected disability, the member's spouse would receive a lump sum payment equal to 50% of the member's final average salary and a monthly benefit equal to 50% of the disability benefits. If there is no spouse, the member's dependent children would receive those benefits at equal shares. What HB 2063 provides is that on and after July 1, 2019, so this bill is backdated slightly, if a member's death is service-connected and no death benefits were payable, the member's spouse would receive a benefit equal to 50% of the member's final average salary, or if there was no dependents, the retirement benefit that the member would have been entitled to had the member retired, whichever one of those two amounts would be greater. The bill also provides some benefits to the member's children if they are under the age of 18 or under age 23 if the child is a full-time student. Each child would receive an annual benefit equal to 10% of the member's final average salary. The benefit would end on the last day of the month the child turns 18 or 23 if they, again, if those children are full-time students. The total combined spousal and children's benefits under this bill shall not exceed 75% of the member's final average salary. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I can stand for any questions about House Bill 2063.
Thank you. Committee questions? I'd have just a couple as I think through it. So the death benefit, if someone has a service-connected death, would they have to be eligible for retirement at that point? If I'm not yet eligible for retirement, how would that work?
Yes, this benefit is if you have been disabled, but then you did not, survive long enough to make it to that retirement age. If you get disabled and then hit the normal retirement age, then that you can get kind of retired in that sense, and then you can draw your retirement benefit. This is in kind of, if you have a service-connected disability and don't get to retirement age, so that these benefits would kick in at that point for the spouse and the children.
Okay, I will keep making sure that it's clear in my head, and thank you for that explanation. And currently then, there is no benefit for the children either in the current law?
Not if there is, only if there's like no spouse currently, then the dependent children can receive the benefit in equal shares. But if there is a spouse involved, the spouse gets that lump sum of the final average salary and then the 50% of the disability benefit. That's all there is currently.
Thank you. Other questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you for the overview. With that, we would look to research or whoever might have a fiscal note to review for the committee. I have received it, and I know the committee has received it. Is there anyone able to walk us through that? I know it's not a huge number. The committee have any questions on the fiscal note as distributed? Anything related? Representative Miller, please do.
According to Capers, the agency's consulting actuary completed a cost estimate on the proposed changes. The study indicates that the benefit changes contained in HB 2063 would increase the employer contributions by $222,000 or 0.04% spread across all 112 KP&F employer members, including both state and local governments. With regards to the actuarial costs, the enactment of the bill would result in the increased unfunded actuarial liabilities totaling $91,000, with a corresponding increase in the unfunded actual payment rate of 0.01% over a closed 20-year period. And then it goes on to say there'd be certain administrative costs, but they'd be negligible.
Thank you. Any questions or clarification? Saying 91,000 and an unfunded liability and the percentage, that's hard to get that definite in rounding, I would think, on that. What is our unfunded liability as a for the KP&F plan? Okay, so thank you. That's more than fine. Seeing no other questions, we will move on from there, but I would actually start with our neutral testimony from the Capers Department, and then we will move into our proponents. Normally, if there are other neutral conferees, I will have them go later, but Director Conroy, I'd like to have your words if we could.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee. I think you have some testimony before you from Capers on House Bill 2063, and I think David and Melissa have given some good background on the bill. And we just checked the unfunded liability for KP&F is $950 million. Funded ratio is 75%. And just, again, just to touch a little bit on that background, this is for KP&F, Kansas Police and Fire members, Tier 2, which is about 98% of the KP&F members. That's anybody that joined after July 1st of 1989. And this bill addresses what happens if that person is disabled in that group and that person passes away. And so right now, under current law, if a person's disabled and they get to that normal retirement markers is laid out in that memo, so it's either age 50 with 25 years, age 55 with 20, or age 60 for 15 years, then they're converted from that disability benefits to the normal retirement. So currently, if they die, if a KPNF member who is disabled dies before reaching that normal retirement date, then they get the spouse receives both a one-time lump sum benefit equal to 50% of the member's final average salary at the time of disability, so annual, that final average salary, and then a monthly benefit equal to 50% of the member's disability benefit. And the way that works, that's probably about 25% of their final average salary. So the spouse gets that one-time payment, and then they're going to get about 25% of what their spouse was earning while disabled. And as David pointed out, if there's no surviving spouse, then that spousal benefit goes to dependent children in equal shares. And then if there's no spouse or no dependent children, then the member's beneficiary receives that one-time lump sum payment of 100% of the member's current annual salary. So this change then would, again, it's service-connected. They're disabled because they're service-connected. Then the benefit structure would change. And as noted here at the top of page 2 of the testimony, this does say, this does make the bill retroactive to July 1st of 2019. So there's currently there's been a death of a KPNF member who was disabled that this bill would retroactively address. So under the new bill, and I think David touched on it, but just so under this bill, then the new benefit would be the greater of either a monthly benefit equal to 50% of the member's final average salary at the time of disability, plus that 10% for each dependent child, up to a 75% maximum. And then if there are no dependent child, then the retirement benefit the member would have received then would go to the spouse, and it's the greater had the member been able to retire. And those costs, again, it's been touched on by Representative Miller in the fiscal note. This, in terms of working with our consulting actuary, right now, out of about the 7,500 KPNF members, there's about 20 to 30 who become disabled each year. And so it's a small group, fortunately. And of course, it appears, we don't track exactly the reason for the death, but it appears that there'd be, on average, maybe one disabled KPNF member who dies each year. So it's a very small cost. And again, that actuarial cost, again, our actuary by law has to give you the actuarial cost, and so it's carried out to the second decimal point. So it's getting pretty, it's there, but again, it's almost, as Chairman Johnson indicated, it's almost in that rounding area in terms of actuarial costs. So the normal cost would increase by about 0.03%, and then the unfunded actual liability, again, is Actuarial Miller indicated, be $91,000 or your 0.01%. So, and this is on a base of $55 million total payroll. So it's $222,000 best estimate spread over all 115 employers. So it's a very, very minimal cost to, in terms of the system for the benefit change. And administratively, of course, KPERS could absorb any changes on that front. And just to remind you, this bill was passed by the House in 2020, or version of the bill, 125 to nothing. The Senate Committee on Financial Institutions and Insurance did recommend the bill favorably for passage last year. Went to the Senate Committee of the Whole, and that was the time then that the 2020 session ended, and so that bill was not taken up. But again, this is retroactive, very small number of people, and a very, very minimal cost.
Thank you for the overview. With questions, we'll begin with Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Conroy, how many families or spouses, I guess, are currently receiving the benefit that's under the current program?
Well, I mean, there's currently, yeah, there'd be about that. Well, I guess, I'm not sure. I have an active number. I guess I was thinking, it's about 20 or 30 a year, and then some of them, then they switch over to retirement. So we have some fading out, and unfortunately, then the few that retire. So it's a small group, yeah, but we could get you the exact number.
Representative Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question with a couple follow-ups. So why did we pick, I remember this bill, very solid bill. Why did we pick 75%? It's 10% plus 10% plus 5. Why didn't we pick 70 or 80? Do you remember?
I think that's similar then to other benefit structures. That 75% maximum is in other places in the KPNF program.
So that'd be 2.5 kids, right? That doesn't work so well. So we're basically going to say 70. Is that true? And then for the committee's information then, let's just say there was that 50% benefit, which became 25, which you brought out. Thank you very much. Based on that 25, now we're increasing that simply to, let's say, 35, right? Is that 35% deductible? They have to pay taxes on that amount of money? State tax or federal?
I mean, disability is not subject to taxable, it's not a taxable event.
Right. So I just want to bring out to the committee, that is not only is it a small amount in the big scope of things, but the amount of money, either 25% or 30% that's going to this family that has just now, lost a spouse, that is very little money to maintain a family. Thank you.
Other questions, committee? I would have one just relating, as you mentioned, 75% as the cap was consistent with the cap that we had in other places for benefits. What would I typically be at if I was continuing? So 75 is the cap, 50% is there. Is the retirement benefit pretty close to that? Is it typically between that 50 to 75%? How is that? And with disability, how does that typically come out?
Right. I mean, I guess you're talking about KPNF, the max on normal retirement.
That, as well as where my service members might be at various points in their career, should they be disabled and should this befall them, what might that payout tend to be? Is it going to be typically in that 50 to 75 range that then gets knocked if it is the spousal benefit in these cases?
I mean, I think that's fair. And of course, the maximum under KPNF in terms of earning is 90% for a normal retirement, 36 years of service. But you're right, in terms of people coming disabled, it'd probably be in that range, that window of 50, 75 seems appropriate.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing and hearing none, thank you for the overview, Director Conroy, and we will move to our proponent testimony, and we'll begin with Mr. Trader. Ryan, welcome to the committee.
I just wanted to check my mic. Does that sound correct?
Very good.
Very good. Okay. Well, thank you for letting me come virtually and speak to you today on House Bill 2063. I think I'd like to first disclose that I am a trustee for the KPERS board, and my testimony today is my own and does not reflect the KPERS board. Hopefully my testimony can add some clarity today. It's going to offer a perspective as a KPNF member and probably provide some background context why this bill is important. I'm a third-generation firefighter. My grandfather and my father both worked for the Kansas City, Missouri Fire Department. My brother works currently as a firefighter in Kansas City, Kansas. And as you can probably tell, I actually work for the city of Olathe as a captain. Even though I've only been on the job for 10 years, I've been exposed to the profession my entire life, and I've heard the perspective of firefighters dating back to the 1950s. And that gives me a little bit of context into how this has developed and how the fire service has developed. So there's a simple truth at the heart of this bill, and that's that the fire service has changed. It isn't as much that the duties of the job has changed, but the environment that we operate in and what we know has evolved. I believe this same sentiment probably to be true for the police force. For this testimony, though, I'm going to focus on one possible service-connected disability, and I'm going to use firefighter cancer. And I use this one because it's the most prevalent and probably applicable to this bill change. And hearing some of the questions and knowing about this bill, I want to elaborate quickly on the demographic that this bill will benefit, because it is a very specific and rare group of KP&F members. So it would be a KP&F member who dies from a service-connected disability while they were on medical disability. As of today, all disabled KP&F members are treated the same, whether the disability is the result of the job or something that occurred off the job. When a member is placed on medical disability for service-connected illness or injury and then passes away, as has been stated, their beneficiary will receive 25% of their final average salary as an annual benefit. And I want to contrast that against a member who dies on scene or shortly following, who is then entitled to the line of duty death benefit of 50% of their final average salary paid to their beneficiaries. So this bill will be used for KP&F members who are too young to qualify for retirement, are on medical disability due to a service-connected illness or injury, and then later die from that illness or injury after they've been moved into medical disability. So passing this bill in a way is in essence stating that the sacrifice of a police officer or a firefighter that dies on scene is the same as one who dies in a prolonged fight against a service-connected disability or illness. That's kind of why I'm here to urge you today to consider this bill and treat these members as a line of duty death, and in doing so, giving their families the same benefits as we've allocated. The one concept I want to elaborate on is firefighter cancer and on why this bill change is crucial for public safety families. So research and data collection for firefighter cancer, as I stated last year, it's really just begun, and it'll take years to understand and correlate the data. The key to it is there's a definite correlation between firefighters and cancer, and it's become undeniable. Of the line of duty deaths since 2002, 60% of those line of duty deaths have been to cancer. And with that, an average American has a 40% chance of being diagnosed with cancer, whereas a firefighter now has a 60% chance of dying from cancer. So that's a pretty big difference. We are beginning to recognize that young firefighters are dying from cancer that is job related, and it's not as we had previously believed to be random. The recent discovery of firefighter related cancer is just one example of a cause of service-connected disability death that is currently being overlooked by the KP&F or CAPER statutes. So House Bill 2063 was created to protect the families of firefighters and police officers who have been unrecognized under the current structure and rightfully deserve those line of duty death benefits. Of course, being a KP&F Board of Trustee member, I know we have to consider the funded ratio and the UAL. So I also want to put it on the other side. So I know as a committee that one of the main questions will be how will this bill affect CAPERS? And going from the other side of that, a well-paid firefighter with around 15 years of service and experience in the state of Kansas will earn $60,000. 15 years is used because that's when they would become vested into the KP&F system. So they would earn around $60,000. If the same firefighter dies of a service-connected disability today, his beneficiary will receive an annual lifetime benefit of $15,000. With the passing of House Bill 2063, that benefit would increase to $30,000 annual benefit. A minimal cost, I know it's not exact, to the $23 billion system, is still an incredible impact to a family that has just lost a loved one. The occurrence of these events is rare because of the ineligibility of a member to retire at that age, and a majority of line of duty deaths events are immediate. So in closing, no firefighter enters the fire service fully knowing the consequences of the job. I doubt you'll ever hear one complain about the unforeseen consequences like the rate of cancer, PTSD, or cardiovascular death. Both police and firefighters have come to accept both the risk of sacrificing their life on an active scene and the risk of running hundreds of calls per year that could lead to a life-ending disability. So with that, I urge you to change the perspective on the definition of light-in-duty death and use House Bill 2063 to correct the oversight that is currently in the benefit structure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. and Trustee Trader. Appreciate you joining us and helping with your perspective. Committee questions? I would have one. You'd mentioned, and I think it is important to consider comparing it to what happened if the death occurred on scene. And are those benefits the same, the 50, the 10, and the 75 cap? So is that identical across the board?
Yeah, that change was made to match that if they had died a line of duty death on scene. So it was bringing them to be equal.
Thank you. Other questions, committee? Seeing none and hearing none, thank you for your testimony. We'll now move to Ms. Katie Wells. And if I saw you on earlier, if you've been able to hang with us, please join and share your perspective.
Good afternoon. Yes, I'm here. Thank you. I want to thank you for having me today. Can you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you well.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. My name is Katie Wells. My husband, Michael Wells, was a firefighter and a lieutenant for the city of Lenexa, Kansas. This is a picture of my husband, Michael, taken just a few years ago, and our three children, Olivia, Johnny, and Caroline. Michael was also a loving husband, father, brother, and friend. On October 18th, 2018, at the very young age of 38, Michael was diagnosed with stage 4 esophageal cancer after being employed with the city for 13 years. He fought a very courageous battle, and he passed away on September 14th, 2019, 2 days after his 39th birthday. Michael loved being a firefighter and had dreamed of this career since he was a very young boy. He had a servant's heart and gave his whole self to his job. I always, as a firewife, had the worry that he might not come home from a fire, but I never dreamed he could get cancer and slowly die from his job. I didn't know before his diagnosis that cancer is the #1 killer for firefighters. When Michael got sick, he was on short-term disability. And then he was forced to medical out after 6 months. His pay was cut in half, and the bills continued to roll in. We were walking through hell. I'm a teacher, first grade teacher, and was trying to work and take care of Michael and our 3 little kids, and we were struggling. The job that Michael gave his entire self to was now not recognizing that this could have been caused from his job, from the hours that he spent on fires, investigating fires. He was sent to the hospital several times for breathing in toxin materials. He was burned on a fire and sent to the hospital for smoke inhalation. We were on our own. And then when he passed away, his pay was cut to 1/4 of a firefighter's income for me to take care of our 3 young children. Michael, the job that he laid his life down for every day, we felt like was not supporting our family. I'm here today to ask for your support to Bill HB 2063 in hopes that no other family has to walk through that difficult journey that we had to walk through. Like I said, my children will never see their dad again. The girls won't get to go to another dance with their dad. My son won't get to go to another fishing trip or anything like that. So I just ask that you consider this bill. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony and your story. Committee comments or discussion with Ms. Wells? Representative Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My comment just goes back to exactly what she was saying, that I think the disability amount is too low.
Thank you, Representative Riley, for weighing in. Others? What I am seeing around the room as well is folks giving you their regards. And
Thank
we
you.
appreciate you standing strong to share Michael's story and your testimony, which I know was not easy. I know teaching first grade has gotten even easier in the last year. So anyway, thanks for all that you continue to do.
Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. The next proponents that we have, I believe, are written only from Ed Klump, lobbyist with the Association of Police Chiefs, Mick Shanks with the Fraternal Order of Police, and Dennis Phillips with the Kansas State Council of Firefighters. Were any of these or anyone else wishing to appear as a proponent of 2063? Seeing and hearing none, I'd again direct the committee to the written testimony that we do have from each of the three that were just mentioned. Moving to the next section, is there anyone wishing to appear as an opponent to House Bill 2063? Seeing none, is there anyone else wishing to appear neutral? And anyone else at all on 2063? Representative Miller.
I do have a question. It was mentioned earlier that this bill would be retroactive to a particular date and affect one particular family. Would that be Ms. Wells?
I believe that it would be. I don't know if that information is meant to be kept confidential to any purpose, but
Well,
I think most of us would hope that that is the case.
yeah, it puts me in a tough spot because I appreciate confidentiality, but I would also like to see an amendment to make sure that family was covered. So if the two can meet, that'd be my request.
So thank you, and if we might refer that to the KPERS entity to make sure that whatever we're doing does cover Michael Wells, that would be great. Thank you, Representative. Any other questions? Anyone else, again, anyone else on 2063? Hearing none, we will close the hearing. Thanks to everyone who has worked so hard, both in their service and in bringing this bill last year and again this year. So committee will probably look at taking action on this potentially at our next meeting if we have time. If not, on Wednesday, we would plan to vote on Monday. If anyone has further information that they need, please let me know, but we will move ahead on it quickly. With that, it's nearly 5 o'clock. Representative Miller.
Mr. Chairman, I have an email from the committee secretary that says we're meeting at 5 in 172 West. Do we know anything about that?
I don't know anything about that. Okay. So a notice has come out that we're meeting at 5 today in 172 West. I am not planning on meeting at 5 in 172 West. Representative Collins.
I just want to mention, I had one this morning saying we were meeting at 8 in the morning, and that didn't happen apparently, so.
That did not. So, and these are coming from Jan's email. We'll double check what is going on. I've looked at that also. It may have been when I asked her to resend the meeting link that a time would have been attached to when she sent that email, because I know the first one went around 8 o'clock.
I was sure that if there was a mistake made, it was by you and not her.
I think that would be correct. So I do appreciate you pointing that out, Representative Miller. in each case, we would announce a meeting here or on the floor. We would not call a surprise meeting in time. For those of you that haven't been through that process before, they have to be announced somewhere so that the public is aware of our meetings. And I apologize for that. We'll continue with the Monday, Wednesday, 3:30 schedule. And if you see something different than that, we'll certainly make that clear. Not likely to happen until late in the session if something strange is going on that we have to address. Representative Proctor.
Mr. Chair, I don't know if this is in order because the hearing's closed, but you were talking about the timeline for final action on 2063 after you close the hearing. I really feel like I'd like to know the answer to the question of how many families are in the same situation as Ms. Wells that are not going to be covered by this bill before I feel comfortable moving to final action on this.
So thank you for the question, and we'll work to find the information that we can get from Capers, and perhaps that will take us to next Monday rather than Wednesday to make sure we get those answers. If there are a number of questions, do get those to me or directly to Capers. They're always great at getting us information. With that, I would like to look to Capers for just a moment and see. I don't believe we have any conferees on 2064, which is listed for hearing today, other than Capers. I would ask if there were other conferees to 2064, if they make themselves known, proponent, opponent, or neutral. Sometimes unusual to have no proponents for a bill, but if not, I'm wondering, Director Conroy, if we might move both of these items to Wednesday and have the hearing on 2064, as well as enjoy the overview and the funding information that you have, if that is possible with your schedule. And seeing that, if staff is also able to make that change, I know Revisor Weiss, that would be a change for you to Wednesday to give us that overview on the bill. Is that possible?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that's fine.
Thank you. So with that, we will move the remainder of the items on the agenda with 2064 and the overview from Capers to our Wednesday meeting. And is there anything else for the good of the committee? If not, thanks to everyone for participating. Thanks to everyone for being safe who have made the choice that was right to be on WebEx. And we are adjourned. We'll see you Wednesday.